Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Liam's Fight Night Picks, and welcome to the new home of Liam Fight Night Picks here over on the Jay's Fight Talk YouTube channel. I'm delighted to be back. It's been a few weeks, but you didn't think I wasn't going to do a show for one of the best fight cards that may ever exist in the game of boxing. Absolutely buzzing for this week. Cannot wait to get into it. I'm delighted to be joined by my guest, James Sweetnam. How are you, my friend? How are we?
Yeah, very good, mate. Thank you for having me on. And as you mentioned, it's an absolutely cracking card, so I can't wait to break it down with you.
Yeah, look, it's 7 fights that could be main events from London to the west coast of LA, the west coast of America to China with the Zhang fight. You could put this card anywhere in the world as main events and they sell at least 10K tickets. The fact it's all on the same card is absolutely bonkers, isn't it? The Saudi takeover of boxing, shall we say? Okay, it's maybe diluting the cards we're getting on a home front, but when it gives us cards like this, you can't really complain, can you?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I mean, obviously, people have got things to say about Saudi Arabia, and they're obviously entitled to those opinions. But the card itself, purely from a boxing standpoint, is one of the best we've seen in a very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't think of... You can name cards that have had 2 or 3 absolutely 50-50 fights on it, and they maybe come once or twice a year, don't they? But to have a card where near enough every fight is a 50-50, I mean, I can't think of anything in recent times that I can remember. I'm not sure about yourself.
No, being honest, I can't. I mean, people talk about the comparisons between MMA and boxing and how potentially MMA sometimes has the higher quality of cards and boxing lacks in that sense. But this card is an absolute blockbuster, literally from the first fight all the way up to the top. I think every single fight we're going to break down is going to be fantastic for us. I think people are going to enjoy listening to it because each one could be a fight of the night. It's one of those cards.
Yeah, look, you teamed me up perfectly, mate. So let's get straight into it. We're going to start in the 175-pound light heavyweight division. It is Joshua Buatsi and Callum Smith. You're going to notice a theme on this show. Those governing bodies have got their 3% paws all over it, and it is the WBO interim world title for what it's worth on this fight. I mean, we all know who the king is in this division. He's defended his throne in the main event, but the next cab off the rank, shall we say, for the WBO at least, is Joshua Buatsi in possession of this belt. Going up against Liverpool's Callum Smith. Let's talk about Buatsi first, mate. So he's 19-0, 13 stoppages in those 19 fights. An impressive 2024, shall we say. He beat his amateur teammate and friend Dan Aziz. If we're honest, he carried him maybe through the last few rounds of that fight at Wembley Arena this time last year, pretty much, and then made a statement against Willie Hutchinson in a fight where a lot of people were doubting him. First of all, what's your opinions of Joshua Buatsi's career so far as a whole?
It's difficult, isn't it? I think when Joshua Buatsi first turned pro, he had so much potential. And coming off the Olympics, we all expected him to do big things. I mean, people were even making out that this guy was going to be the British Andre Ward. And it truly looked like that in the early portion of his career. He's putting together really impressive performances. He looked slick. He looked fantastic. And I had high hopes for Josh Buatsi. And over the years, things have gone a little bit stale. It's been a long time since those Olympic Games. But you mentioned there, last year, he's been rejuvenated, hasn't he? A couple of big performances, and people are forgetting now that the Bivol fight didn't work out and he wasn't able to take that one. And I think now he's in a position going into this Callum Smith fight, where he can get this win, I think he'll finally get the respect he potentially deserves.
Yeah, look, Joshua Buatsi, JB, just business as the moniker he goes by. And I said this before. I love his look on fight week. He keeps the bushy beard and the crazy hair until the weigh-in. And you see him the next night and he does look like a businessman, doesn't he? He's clean, the beard's tight, the hair's all shaven, and he looks ready for action. I do think his career's not caught fire. And yes, you can put some of the blame on him as a fighter, but there also needs to be a proportion of the blame for me put on Matchroom and in more recent times, boxer. And I will say, I think without Riyadh's season, I don't know where Joshua Buatsi would have turned with boxer. That Dan Aziz fight, you couldn't really see the next option after Dan Aziz until Riyadh's season came along and offered him, obviously, the Woody Hutchinson fight. So, yes, 31 years of age now, 2016 Olympian and won a medal there. But we're in 2025 now, so he really does need to show that he is ready to be the next kingmaker once Bivol and Beterbiev move on, doesn't he?
Yeah, he most certainly does. We mentioned that Bivol fight before. It didn't end up happening, and I think people were really disappointed in Joshua Buatsi before that. As you mentioned there, the Dan Aziz fight, where was he going to go after that? I don't particularly know, if I'm being honest with you. So I think that Riyadh's season has come around at the exact right time for him. And I think if he can beat Callum Smith, he catapults himself way up there. And Beterbiev, as you mentioned, he's not going to go on forever. And neither's Bivol, to be honest with you. So Buatsi could potentially put himself in line. If he wins a WBO interim title, who knows where those belts are going to go? If one of them comes vacant, Boatsy could essentially get elevated to a full champion. So he's putting himself in a brilliant position if he can win this one.
Yeah, he is. I mean, he's already the WBO interim champion. He won that belt in the Willie Hutchinson fight.
Of course.
So he's holding on to it, isn't he? And like you say, I think Beterbiev retires, win or lose, on Saturday night. So there is potentially an email coming the way of whoever wins this fight saying you are now the full world champion, which, look, we want the belts moving around, but champions by email is a area I'm not always the biggest fan of. Let's move on to his opponent in Callum Mundo Smith. Look, Mundo's best days were at 168. He was the former number one in that division by winning the World Boxing Super Series, by being the WBA, Ring Magazine, and WBC Diamonds. It's been a while since we spoke about one of those belts, back 6 or 7 years ago. It's fair to say, though, his 2 losses have come against 2 fighters for me that are in my top 5 pound for pound. So Canelo Alvarez in 2020 and Artur Beterbiev at the start of 2024. That Canelo loss took place during COVID times. He couldn't get sparring partners into his training camp. He took the fight at 4.5 weeks' notice against, a generational talent. So that was hard enough. And the Beterbiev performance, for me, was an interesting one. If you looked at him after that fight, he looked, for all intents and purposes, a completely broken man that realised his time in boxing was over. I never expected to see him fight again. So I suppose the big question here is, what is left from Callum Smith? What does he have left in the gas tank, and what do you expect on Saturday night?
I think similarly to Joshua Boatsy, it's weird to say this because he became a world champion, Callum Smith, but he's also had a lackluster career in a sense. I thought he was going to go on to do so much more. I remember when he first came onto the scene and he was beating the likes of Rocky Field, and I think that was a first round knockout in Liverpool, and he looked truly exceptional. And I think we all expected big things out of Callum Smith. He was headlining the Echo frequently, and especially after beating George Groves. I mean, that World Boxing Super Series was absolutely fantastic. I think he had that war with Eric Skoglund in the first round, and then Niki Holskin, I think the kickboxer, in the semi-final, and then he goes on and beats George Groves. And Groves, at the time, had just beaten Chris Eubank Jr., so in career best form, arguably. And then Callum Smith goes in and absolutely obliterates him. And I'm thinking this guy is going to be on top of the super middleweight division for a very long time. And then he fights John Ryder. And obviously you mentioned there he had 2 losses on his record. You can argue that there's 3 because John Ryder put in a very good performance.
Well, Ryder beat him for me,
Ryder
beat him.
Yeah, so I think there's 3 losses on Callum Smith's record. And against Canelo Alvarez, it wasn't an ideal performance, and he didn't overly go out of his way to try and get the victory. That's how it felt. I mean, obviously, it's easier said than done when you're in with somebody who's as much as a genius as Canelo Alvarez is. Against Artur Beterbiev, potentially he was forced to because Beterbiev is just relentless. But it did feel like he gave it a little bit more against Artur Beterbiev, even though it ended up being a pretty devastating knockout loss. So I think he knows this is just last chance saloon for him. I think he's going to go all out, and I think he's going to give Boatsy all he can handle. I think it's going to be a close fight. And I'm not sure when we're giving our predictions, but I think Callum Smith is going to give his all in this one.
Yeah, look, I agree. I think Callum Smith arguably has the more impressive resume. He's been in with better fighters than Boatsy. I mean, you mentioned that first round stoppage of Rocky Fielding for the British and Commonwealth belts at the time. I remember when he beat Luke Blackledge for the British belt a second time on the Anthony Joshua, Eric Molina undercard. And I mean, he flatlines Luke Blackledge. Blackledge didn't move for quite a while after that. And I mean, he was a victim of the time Matchroom were coming into boxing, and Eddie was struggling to get fights for his world champion, for his prospects. He didn't have the same pulling power that he does now, where he monopolizes the American market to an extent as well as the UK. So you could argue Callum was a victim of coming through maybe a couple of years too early, if that makes sense. But it's an interesting one. I'd like to think he's got one big performance left in him, but if he doesn't, and Joshua Boatsy is ready to make that statement that we've been crying out to see, if he's in the same mood he was in against Willie Hutchinson, then it could be a very long night for Callum Smith. But we'll come on to predictions for this one. How do you see, what is the first fight of the night, amazingly to say? How do you see this one going down?
Yeah, crazy say it's the first fight of the night because it could be a headliner in the UK. But I'm going to go with Joshua Boatsy. I think he's going to win this one on points.
Going Joshua Boatsy via points. Okay, so I am actually, despite my reservations about Callum Smith, I'm backing Callum Smith for a points victory. I just think the level he's been at is going to pay dividends in this fight. One accusation you can throw at Boatsy is he doesn't always put together a complete 36-minute performance. Callum Smith does, and he's done it time and time again. I don't think he's come back for money. I don't think he's come back because he needs to. He's come back because he feels he has something to offer the game. Yes, okay, the Saudi bright lights have helped that decision, but also I think he's got something left to offer the game. So I'm backing Callum Smith for what would be an upset victory, but a Callum Smith points victory nonetheless is how I'm seeing this first fight going. But every single fight we're going to talk about is a 50-50, and we're seeing it here. I can make an argument for Boatsy winning, as you could probably make an argument for Smith winning as well. It's just fantastic, isn't it?
It most certainly is. I mean, I could have gone the other way, and I think this one, it's a very interesting fight because, as we mentioned, the sort of attitudes of both these fighters, it seems like a cliche to say, but this one really could come down to who wants it more.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to move on, mate, and it's going to be our first of two stops in the heavyweight division on Saturday. And it is the Big Bang, Zhilei Zhang and Ajit Kabayel. And this one has the WBC's interim world title on the line. Look, again, we know who the kingmaker is in the heavyweight division, and Usyk has come out and said he's going to fight on. So this isn't going to have any ramifications, I don't think, at the top end of the division anytime soon, but an intriguing fight nonetheless. Let's talk about the 41-year-old, Chineseman first. 27 2-1 career records and an interesting career. I mean, started out, always been in America for his career, only fought out in China once, which is incredible to think for a Chinese fighter. Was picked up by Matchroom USA pretty much from the get-go and looked decent. Then had a couple of lackluster performances, including the draw he had back in 2018, I believe it was, and Matchroom let him go. Came over and, arguably ruined Joe Joyce's career with those two fights, especially the first one at the Copper Box. Done his eye and broke his heart as well, I believe. I just don't know about Zhang. Look, he's a big guy. He hits hard. But as we saw against Joseph Parker, if he doesn't get an opponent out of there within 5 rounds, he arguably lost the 10 other rounds in that fight against Joseph Parker. So your opinions on the Chinaman to get started?
I think he's class. I love Zhilei Zhang. I mean, Big Bang, I think he's a fantastic fighter to watch. He's always entertaining. He can knock you out of a single shot. Granted, if you can get past those sort of 5-6 rounds, you've got a really good shot at beating him. And Joseph Parker proved that there is an anecdote to beating Zhilei Zhang. So it's very much doable, and Kabayel will have a shot. But Zhang's power, it's truly phenomenal. And you mentioned the Joe Joyce fight there, and I think it was mental from Frank Warren and the rest of the guys to put Joe Joyce in again against Zhang, somebody who clearly had a style. A power-punching southpaw with slit skills was never going to be an easy matchup for Joe Joyce. So I think Zhang's a great fighter, and it'll be interesting to see if he can get Kabayel out of there early. I mean, you mentioned he's 41, so definitely in the tail end of his career. But in terms of miles on the clock, he's not had that many wars. So I think he's relatively fresh for his age. Obviously, a very long amateur career. It's a shame, as you mentioned, that he's not fought more in China. Because I think 12 million people or something ridiculous tuned in for his rematch with Joyce.
It's an interesting career. He seems to have been, after the Joseph Parker loss, you thought going in with Wilder. I mean, we know where Wilder is at now, but at the time you thought that could have been a recipe for disaster for him, if that makes sense. Coming off the back of such a energy and confidence sapping defeat as the Parker one looked to be, but that knockout of Wilder will forever be on his highlight reel. The way he sort of made Wilder look up as he's lost his balance and then connected with that big right hand will forever be there. But I do question his gas tank. I do think if you can get through 4 or 5 rounds with Zhang, then you're in with a good chance, because he has a habit of just being out of puff or only throwing single shots. And that's a tailor-made game plan. We'll move on to Kabayel. As I'm saying here, it's an Indian summer of his career. Look, we know he was brought onto the Riyadh season cards as a bit of an opponent. What he done to Makhmudov back in December 2023, that wasn't meant to happen. He was there to get stopped himself. And then he's gone on to beat Frank Sanchez since. His style for me is tailor-made to get the best of Zhang. It's sitting on the chest, it's coming forward, it's throwing punches all night, and it's the selection from head to body. What do you think of Kabayel? I mean, he's the true definition of winner stays on when it comes to these Riyadh season cards, isn't he?
He most certainly is. I think Ajit Kabayel is a brilliant fighter. I was speaking to somebody else about him yesterday, and I've been infuriated by his whole entire career, because I have been on the Ajit Kabayel hype train, I think, since 2017 when he fought Derek Chisora. He did fight Chisora, yeah. He won nearly every single round that night against Chisora. It was in Monaco, and he was brilliant. And off the back of that, I thought, this Kabayel is going to be a serious problem in the division. And then he didn't get any opportunity since then. And I was really frustrated for him. There was a couple of times where he was rumoured to get the Tyson Fury fight. I think I think it was going to be Tyson Fury's second comeback fight where he was sort of in the mix for that, and it never ended up happening. And then once again, when Chisora got the trilogy with Tyson Fury, and I thought Kabayel would be a great opponent for Tyson Fury because I think he's a very, very good fighter. He goes into Riyadh season, nobody really giving him a chance in that first fight. And then in the second one, he's brilliant again, bullies Frank Sanchez. So I think he's going to be fantastic in the heavyweight division. I think it's great to have him on board. And I think, as you mentioned, that style matchup with Zhilei Zhang's really interesting because he's got the perfect style to make Zhang gas out, to break him down, to bully him, to sit on his chest, to try and rough him up. But at the same time, he's open potentially to one of Zhilei Zhang's big bangs. So it's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, and he's 25-0. Look, that Chisora fight back in 2017, I mean, it was on a Monaco card. It was a stinker, if we're being honest. It wasn't a fight you'll go back and watch it. It was Del Boy seemed to have one of those nights where he didn't want to be there, which his career was littered with around that period of time. So it's great to see Kabayel now getting the opportunities. Let's break down then the second fight of the night. Let's get a prediction in. I'll start with yourself.
Right, okay, so Zhilei Zhang could knock Kabayel with one punch. That's very much possible, but I'm going to stick on the Kabayel hot jam. I've been backing him since 2017 or whenever it was for a very long period of time. I think it's finally going to come to fruition. I think we're finally going to see just how good this guy is. I'm going to go Kabayel. I'm going to be daring and go by stoppage. Yeah, go on. I'll go Kabayel stoppage.
Kabayel by stoppage. Yeah, look, for me, Zhang is one-dimensional, and as he's gone up, his years have gone on. So the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen his gas tank decline as well. Yes, the lights off power is there, but there's no gas tank. After 9 minutes, 12 at a push, he's absolutely blowing and he can't seem to do anything about it. So the style of Kabayel is there for me. I think he may get dropped early. I think he may have to get up off the seat of his pants, maybe in round 2 or round 3, but he's going to come on strong. As Zhang ties, he's going to find a home for his body shots and hooks. I think a stoppage in round number 9 for Ajak Kabayel to pick up this interim world title is where I'm going for this fight. So we're not going to stop. We're going to carry on. We're on to the third fight of the night. Again, the WBC have got their interim world title out at 154 pounds. It is Virgil Ortiz Jr. and Israel Madrimov. Look, Virgil Ortiz, he's a 22-0 American, but we know the problems he had. So after beating Michael McKinson in 2022, we did not see him in 2023. He had rumoured fights at 147 that fell through. We all knew he had issues making the weight, and it seemed to have caught up with him in 2023. And there was a period of time where he was being spoken about as if he might not fight again, wasn't it? There was a real possibility that he'd taken so much out of his body, he wasn't going to be able to turn it on again. But then 2024 came around. He moved up to 154 pounds, and he had 3 fights. And look, they were all against a certain level of opposition. Yes, he beat Boachuk, but they were all in his best victory there. But now's the time for him to walk the walk, as I've said here, isn't it, for Ortiz? No doubt in the potential and the prospect, but we need to see him start to deliver now, or people are going to lose interest, aren't they?
Yeah, they most certainly are. I mean, for me, first and foremost, this is going to be, for me personally, the most difficult fight to pick on the card. I think it's an absolute barnstormer. But Virgil Ortiz, as you mentioned there, so talented, so gifted, so explosive, so devastating to watch. I hope things can finally work out for him because I think he's a brilliant fighter. And I think if the stars fall in the right manner, he has a real shot of doing something very big in this sport. So I'm hopeful that this can be a big night for Virgil Ortiz.
Yeah, like you say, it's probably outside of the big boys and the fight and Shakur and Floyd, which we'll come on to my reasons for why that in a minute. It's the fight I'm most looking forward to. It just can't not deliver. And we'll come on to Madrimov. Look, as I've said here, it's an instant shot of redemption for him. He picked up the WBA belt on the Knockout Chaos card in March last year, was given his golden ticket against the 147 undisputed champion in Bud Crawford, and gave a very good account of himself. I think the fact that he started so slowly is what cost him in the end. Look, I'm not on the Eddie Hearn train of it was a robbery and Madrimov won that fight. I think I scored it 115, 113 in Crawford's favour. But what I will say, if Madrimov started quicker, he would have had a better chance for me. I mean, he can do it, go the distance. He's got knockout power. What do you make of the Uzbekistani?
I think he's quality. I really think he's good. And as you mentioned there, that could have been the major issue for him starting so slowly because that fight was razor close. And if he goes at Terence Crawford right from the offset, who knows how that would have gone. And going into that, obviously an experienced fighter, but Terence Crawford has been there, done that, worn the T-shirt, etc. And Madrimov hadn't at that level. So I think this will only make him even better. So I think Virgil Ortiz will actually be having to deal with an even tougher version of him than Crawford did.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's going to come out with a point to prove. He may, I know it's not Arm America again, it's back out in Saudi. He may feel like he doesn't want to leave it to chance with the judges again, which ultimately means it's going to be a more exciting fight for us as the fans and for Turkey and everyone that's watching inside the Kingdom Arena. I'll go first on a prediction for this one, mate. I just think Madrimov is going to be too much of Virgil Ortiz. We haven't seen Ortiz in deep waters too much. We haven't seen his chin tested. We haven't seen his gas tank tested. Madrimov is going to do all of those things on Saturday night. And I just think at this point in Ortiz Jr.'s career, it's a gut check he needs, but it's not a gut check he necessarily has answers to. And with that in mind, I think Israel Madrimov via a points decision. I don't think he'll be able to get Ortiz Jr. out of there. I don't necessarily think he'll want to if he's winning the fight commandingly enough, but I do see a comeback points victory for Israel Madrimov. How about yourself?
It's a difficult one because there's part of me that really wants to say that Ortiz is going to prove that he's just as good as we all think he could be. But I think it's coming a little bit early. I think Madrimov might just have that little bit extra in the tank. And I think when it gets really tough, Madrimov is going to come out on top. I'm going to say late stoppage for Madrimov.
Late stoppage for Madrimov. We'll keep going. And we've finally got our first legitimate world title tonight on the line. It is Shakur Stevenson and Floyd the Kid Schofield. It's 12 rounds for the WBC strap down at 135 pounds. I mean, what a stacked division. Keyshawn Davis becoming a world champion with the WBO version of the strap the weekend just gone. Exciting fights to be made in this division. There's Andy Cruz. Will Loma come back? But there's the focus for now for Shakur is actually on getting in the ring. I mean, like I'm saying here, will his hands last? Look, we know he pulled out of the Joe Cordina fight in October with a hand injury that required surgery. We also know that that hand injury occurred through a street fight, whereas, both his hands got busted up pretty badly, which, look, it's one thing damaging them wearing gloves. It's another thing when you're damaging them in a bare knuckle street fight. Are his hands going to be an issue? I mean, an operation at the end of September, we're in the middle of February and he's already coming back. Is he coming back to you quickly?
He could. I mean, he could well be. I mean, you mentioned the street fights there, and I've seen some footage of them. And Shakur Stevenson is far more entertaining on the streets than he is in the boxing ring. But I think in terms of his actual quality, he's one of the very best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. And granted, his hands might not be in the best of conditions right now, but I think his class is just going to shine through. And I think he's going to look dazzling on the night, but not necessarily to everybody's taste, because that has always been an issue throughout his career. But I think the levels are just about far away enough that Shakur won't have too many reservations about his hands.
Yeah, look, I think for me, Shakur Stevenson, if you like the sweet science, if you like a back foot boxer, i.e. Money Mayweather after his pretty boy phase, then Shakur Stevenson is your guy. You will absolutely love him. However, he does not, and we've seen him in fights, actively avoid getting involved in a brawl or a punching match. He will do everything he can to keep it as a long-distance chess match, unless he, feels he's completely in control. So, look, I'm a big fan of Shakur Stevenson, but I do think that he has to keep it on the back foot and a controlled fashion. If it becomes an all-out brawl against Schofield, against anyone, that's where I see him having trouble potentially further down the line. Say he steps in with Gervonta Davis. At some point, Gervonta is going to turn it into a brawl in that fight, and that's where I would lean towards favouring Gervonta Davis. But that's a fight for another time. We will come on to Floyd Schofield. Look, he goes by the real kid, and he's the real bang kid. He said he's not here to make up the numbers. He said he's going to stick it on Shakur. He's not going to allow him to settle or get into a rhythm. It's the opportunity of a lifetime for a Golden Boy fighter, isn't it? For the Golden Boy fighter, isn't it? Look, given next to no chance, his career's on a great trajectory, but arguably this world title fight's probably come in a couple of years even before he hoped to get one, isn't it?
Yeah, it could be a little bit too early for him, but I like his attitude. I like everything I'm hearing from him. I think he's going to give it his all. I mean, you mentioned there, if Gervonta Davis really put it on Shakur Stevenson, that might be the thing that gets tanked the victory. Schofield's going to go in with a similar game plan and just try and bully Shakur, because we talk about Floyd Mayweather and all that sort of stuff, and Floyd Mayweather, when he needed to, he could bite down. We don't know if Shakur Stevenson can do that quite yet, and maybe he can. Maybe he can, but Schofield's going to have to take what he can, and he's going to have to believe in himself. If he really puts it on Shakur, he can break him. That's what he's going to have to hope for.
Yeah, completely agree with you there, mate. So we'll get on to a prediction for this one. I'll let you go first. How do you see this WBC world title fight going down on Saturday?
The safest bet is surely Stevenson on points. So I think I'm going to go with that. Although I've been on a bit of a stoppage theme throughout this show, but I'm going to stick with the points, I think.
Going Stevenson on points. Okay, so look, these Riyadh season cards always have one fight that's a massive shock. And I know I'm in the minority with what I'm about to say, but I believe that Floyd Schofield is going to shock the world on Saturday night.
Wow.
think him putting it on Shakur Stevenson, who we know it has a tendency to get distracted in fights, focus on what's going on outside the ring or look distracted. And the fact that for me, he's rushing back from his hand injury, I just think Floyd Schofield's going to catch him cold and he's not going to know what to do about it. We know he can brawl on the streets. We haven't seen him brawl in the ring. And if Floyd Schofield sticks it on him on Saturday night and he doesn't have full faith in his hands, Shakur's in a world of trouble. So I am backing the massive upset from Floyd Schofield via a 9th round stoppage.
That is a big prediction.
Huge. It's a huge prediction. I'm prepared to be made to look very stupid, but that's what I'm going with for this one.
Yeah, I think that's the moment where the people watching this are going to be up in arms, absolutely blown away by the prediction. But if you get this one right, you're going to look like a genius.
Oh, mate, I'll be so smug next week. Anyway, we will move on and we're sticking with the WBC. We're going up a few divisions to £160. It is Carlos Adames and Hamza Shiraz for Adames's WBC world title. Look, he's the forgotten champ, Adames, isn't he? Look, he's a PBC fighter. He's a typical PBC fighter. It seems to be a prerequisite. If you're going to be a PBC fighter, you fight once a year. Kind of no one really knows about it. And then you go back away and you come back out the following year. But it's a tougher fight than people think this. Adames at 24-1 is going to ask questions of Hamza Shiraz. It's just about whether or not his inactivity is going to be an issue, isn't it, for the champion?
Yeah, I mean, inactivity is never great. But I think that Adames is a skillful fighter. I think, as you mentioned there, he is being overlooked a little bit. I mean, the guy can fight, and he can fight very well. And Shiraz, I don't think, has beaten anybody at his level. I mean, Shiraz is quickly proved himself as a serious problem. But we can't overlook Adames by any stretch of the imagination. This guy can have a tear-up.
Yeah, he can. Look, he is being overlooked. I don't think he's necessarily being overlooked by Hamza Shiraz and his team, but from the boxing fans looking in, you would think that Carlos Adames is almost a competition winner that's lucky to be a world champion. The reality is this is the second defense of the full world title, but before that, he made 2 defenses of the interim WBC strap. So, this is his 5th fight in a row over 12 rounds, championship distance. He will ask questions. It's just whether or not he is in the mentality of wanting to win the fight. We know he's been dodging, or Al Heyman has been dodging the Janabek fight. We know they've wanted to make that unification, but Adames hasn't been picking up the phone. So it's all about, he probably thinks he's going to get a soft touch maybe against Hamza Shiraz. But as we know, this kid seems to be the heir apparent. I mean, I say kid, he is 25 years of age. In boxing terms, he's a kid. 21-0, 17 stoppages. Look, he's on the tip of fans' tongues after his 2024. Those 3 performances, blowing away Liam Williams inside 2.5 minutes, coming from behind on the scorecards to stop Amo Williams out in Saudi on the 5v5. And then, look, it was a mismatch against Tyler Denny, and he proved it to be a mismatch, disposing of him with 3 knockdowns inside 2 rounds. Just how high are you on Hamza Shiraz?
As high as a man can be. I'm on Everest. I'm on Mars. I'm on Venus, whatever you want to call it. I'm high on Hamza Shiraz. I think he can win this one. I think he's an exceptional fighter. And I think Frank Warren is built in perfectly. The right step-up fights at the right time. And if you remember, he had a really controversial one against Bradley Skeet. And I think since then, he's just got better and better. I think he's used that experience. He's honed his craft. I mean, he's been out in America sparring at the best gyms in the world. He's fighting good standards of fighters and beating them quite convincingly. We know that he can bite down in his gum shield when he needs to. You mentioned the Amo fight there. And I think there's a reason Chris Eubank Jr. didn't want to go anywhere near him.
Yeah, it's nothing to do with the fact that there wasn't a world title on it, as he seemed to be profusely saying when he was asked why he didn't take the fight. Look, we'd be remiss to talk about Hamza Shiraz and not address the elephant in the room. And that is the fact he is 6'3". He is absolutely massive for the weight. And look, let's caveat this with saying we've never seen him in any trouble on the scales. We've never seen him come in overweight and then have to go back down. But as we've seen time and time again in boxing, at some point, boiling your frame down to a weight it doesn't naturally want to be at is going to catch up with you and have an effect. Is there a danger it could just happen on Saturday night? I mean, it happens when you least expect it. Do you reckon Hamza Shiraz maybe has 1 or 2 fights left where he can physically bring his body down to 160 pounds?
Quite possibly. I don't think it's going to come into effect this weekend. I still think he's got a little bit of time. He's young enough for his body to still accept the weight cut. And I've interviewed Hamza Shiraz, and he's a lovely guy, and he's so disciplined. He comes from a religious background, and I don't think there's any chance that he will have cut any corners. So I think that the weight cutting is going to go fine for Hamza Shiraz, and I think he's going to come out with a point to prove at the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. So we get on to a prediction, mate. I'll go first for this one myself. Look, as we've both said, it's a much tighter and closer fight than a lot of boxing media and sort of the Queensbury payroll, shall we say, will have you believe. Carlos Adames is a very solid champion. He will ask questions of Hamza Shiraz during this fight, but I just believe Hamza has the ability to answer those questions. He's more active. He's fresher. He's perceivably the hungrier man because he has said he will fight Janabek, which we know Adames has distanced himself from. I don't believe there's going to be a stoppage, but I do believe Hamza Shiraz in a comfortable enough points decision victory to become the new champion of the world. How about you?
As you mentioned there, we agree it's going to be a tough fight for Shiraz. I really think he's going to have to bite down on his gum shield to get the job done, but I think he will get the job done. I'm going to say he gets a late stoppage, and I think he becomes the WBC champion of the world.
Fair enough. So we're going to move on to what is the co-main event. I mean, if you listen to Queensbury and TNT, this is the main event, but no, it is the co-main event. It is Triple D, Daniel Dubois and Joseph Parker. It is for Daniel Dubois' IBF heavyweight world championship. Look, I'll put the asterisks on it of like we said about some of these interim belts. We all know who the number one man is in this heavyweight division, but politics and governing bodies not being able to help themselves meant this belt came away and it's landed in Daniel Dubois' hands. Look, he's beat Hrgovic and he's dismantled Anthony Joshua, so he's a worthy holder of it. But no one's saying he's the number one in the division, Dubois, are they?
No, I don't think so. I mean, that Alexander Usyk fight's a very interesting one because you have to make a decision, and I'm still not convinced either way of whether that shot was low or not. If it wasn't low, could Alexander Usyk have gotten up within 10 seconds? And if he could have done that, could he have survived? That's the question that Daniel Dubois fans are asking. But of course, there's the other side of the coin that people say, well, it was a low blow. Usyk legitimately had a claim, and then he dominated the rest of the fight and ultimately made Daniel Dubois quit. Now, an interesting thing about the quitting is, of course, that happened against Joyce. Yes, the eye injury was pretty appalling that night. And again, it happens against Usyk. However, since then, and it's a testament to his mentality, against Joe Miller, who's a massive, massive man, against Filip Hrgovic, he punched him considerably and quite hard. Daniel Dubois was able to ride out storms. And again, against Anthony Joshua, he was able to do that too. I mean, I know that Daniel Dubois started sparklingly. He dropped Anthony Joshua on a number of occasions, but when Joshua landed that big right hand in return, Dubois had to bite down on his mouth shield. He had to stay composed before landing the right hand to end the show. And linking that to Parker, of course, he's never quit in a fight. I don't think that's in him. But against Dillian Whyte and Anthony Joshua, and arguably in the first Chisora fight, when those fights were hanging in the balance, he didn't go for it. And I think that let him down. Of course, he did a little bit towards the back end of the Dillian Whyte fight, and he ultimately got the knockdown. But I think since teaming up with Andy Lee, I think Parker's mindset is in a far better place. We saw what he did to Deontay Wilder. We saw what he did to Zhilei Zhang. Had that fight been 4 years ago, I think Parker gets up, just loses on points. I think under Andy Lee, he was able to showcase that mentality, to showcase that dog in him, and he was able to get the victory. So I think right now you've got Dubois and Parker, who maybe have struggled mentally in the past, but right now are at the top of their mental games. That makes this one fascinating for me.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Agree with everything you've just said. Just staying on the Dubois side of things quickly before I cover Parker. Look, the Usyk fight, again, the Queensbury payroll will have you believe that he would have won that fight because that should have been a low blow. It's a disgrace that it wasn't called. The reality is the fight went the best part of 8 rounds. Daniel Dubois, other than round 5, didn't win another one of those rounds. And I can watch that through Frank Warren's special rose-tinted glasses that he has for all his fighters, and I probably still struggle to see it any differently. But the resurgence since then, the work that Don Charles and Kieran Farrell have done with him, the big Baby Miller performance. Yes, Baby Miller is a disgrace, shouldn't be in a boxing ring, but was the first man to stop him at the time. The first 3 rounds of the Hrgovic fight, Dubois was getting beaten up. He was eating punches and he wasn't able to get his own offense off. And then he just grew in confidence and eventually managed to stop the Croatian himself. And then you got the AJ performance, which very, very few people saw coming. And Daniel Dubois produced a performance that no matter where else he goes in his career, that night at Wembley Stadium, September the 21st, 2024, will always be remembered in his career because that has propelled him onto new levels. We come on to Joseph Parker, and look, by his own admission, he became a world champion far too early when he beat Andy Ruiz in 2017. He wasn't you know, he was probably just about getting towards fringe world level, but he was highly ranked with the WBO and he got offered the fight. And you're not going to turn down a world title fight, especially for a vacant belt. But lost to Anthony Joshua. He was desperate to stay relevant after that fight. So he jumped in with Dillian White 4.5 months later, when in reality, he needed to take time away to reset himself in his career. But since that Dillian White loss, he's rebuilt very nicely. Yes, he had the loss to Joe Joyce in there. But if you look back at that Joe Joyce fight, he was overweight. He was only been with Andy Lee for a month. And you could just tell that relationship wasn't quite there yet, was it? That fight was 2022 in September. And look at what he's done since. When he took the Wilder fight, no one knew that the version of Deontay Wilder that there is now was going to exist. Everyone thought that Wilder was going to absolutely poleaxe Joseph Parker. The reality is he had a perfect game plan all night, listened perfectly to Andy Lee, and came out with a very wide points victory against, look, the artist formerly known as Deontay Wilder, granted, but it was still Deontay Wilder in that ring. And Zhilei Zhang was the same. He boxed to orders. He listened so well to Andy Lee. And I think Andy Lee is a massive pivotal factor in this fight. Joseph Parker fully trusts his trainer and Andy Lee and will listen to his advice. Unlike what we saw from Jared Anderson with his team last weekend, that's a relationship that fully works in boxing. And that could play a massive difference for me on the night. Don Charles will be huge for Daniel Dubois, but Andy Lee could be an even bigger factor for Joseph Parker. So look, we've set it up nicely, mate. It's time for us both to get off the fence. How do you predict the co-main event going?
I remember being at Daniel Dubois' debut, and I thought this guy is going to be pretty special, and he's turned out to be just that. But Joseph Parker, I remember when he was on the come-up in New Zealand, and he was exhibiting these lightning quick hands, and he just had this aura about him that I felt like he was going to go on to do something amazing. I remember him fighting Carlos Takam, and he was struggling, and Takam was really, and this was a prime Takam no less, really putting it on Parker, and then Parker unleashed this like sort of 30-punch combination. It was ridiculous. It's probably on YouTube to watch it, and he just these fast hands flying towards Takam. And I remember Nick Olin on commentary saying there's a lot to like about this young Kiwi, and there was. And at 24 years of age, he picks up the world title against Andy Ruiz, probably a little bit too early. But I remember at the time thinking, aside from Tyson Fury, obviously Usyk wasn't in the division at this time, but aside from Tyson Fury, I think this guy is the most talented guy in the division. I just think he lacked the mentality. Now that it's all there, I think Parker's capable of winning this one. I think he's capable of outthinking and outboxing Daniel Dubois. My only reservation is, has the mindset lined up too late for the body? Has he put it all together just a little bit too late? I don't know. But I'm going to say we get an upset here. I'm going to say that Joseph Parker gets the victory. And why not? I'll chuck a stoppage in there too.
Chucking a stoppage in there. Look, I think Joseph Parker has the absolute perfect style to dismantle and cause Daniel Dubois problems. Look, the longer this fight goes for me, the more it favours Joseph Parker. He has the style and the temperament to weather any early storm, to probably get up off the seat of his pants again if he needs to, like we saw in the Zhang fight. And then down the backstretch, his experience will show. He'll edge forward. He'll frustrate Daniel Dubois. And I'm also predicting what will be an upset with the how the odds are, but we're going to hear the new IBF champion of the world and Joseph Parker reclaims a heavyweight crown. That is where I'm going with the co-main event. Just leaves us with one fight left to talk about, and what a fight it is. It's Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol. It is all the marbles at £175 on the line. There's no doubting this is number 1 and number 2 in the division. There's no doubting there's a little bit of controversy in the air following the first fight in October. And I think something every boxing fan can agree on is, thank goodness they did not take interim fights and they are straight back in the ring to face each other. Artur Beterbiev, you would argue this is going to be the last dance of his career. We know the body is broken. We know the struggles he's had over the years. He's 41 years of age. How many more times can he do this? All the marbles on the line in this mouth-watering rematch. What do you make of Artur Beterbiev's career briefly and the first fight?
Yeah, so kicking off with the first fight, I don't think I've seen something split people so much, because it really felt like it was a 50-50. And people are absolutely adamant that Beterbiev won. There's people who are absolutely adamant that Bivol won. And a lot of times people are seeing this quite wide on either side. My personal opinion, watching it at the time, was that Dmitry Bivol had won the fight. And I thought he'd almost cruised it at points. But then people have the complete opposite opinion and think that Beterbiev completely dominated it. So I don't think it was a robbery by any stretch of the imagination. But my personal opinion is that Bivol did enough. Beterbiev's body, I mean, time's going to catch up with him, isn't it? But he keeps himself in fantastic shape. We just touched on Shiraz coming from that religious background. Peterbiev's the same. And I think he's a very disciplined man. I think his life is all about boxing. And I still think he wants more to achieve. I mean, so regularly he talks about that he doesn't even rate himself as a good boxer. So clearly that ambition's too there. And his head isn't particularly big, is it? He's a humble man. I think he's the best version that a 41-year-old who's been at world level for a long time can be. He's a thunderous puncher. That's the last thing to go. So I don't think Bivol's going to be shot by any stretch of the imagination.
No, not at all. I don't think Peterbiev is going to become shop-worn and old overnight. I think the fact he's taken the rematch so quickly will work in his favour. I think if we were waiting until August, September time for this, you had more chance than the Peterbiev body breaking down and maybe us never seeing this rematch. Look, he's a cracking fighter. I was fortunate enough to see him in person when he came over to fight Anthony Yards and was blown away at just how ruthless he is. He was happy to take multiple punches, take his licks, get cut up, but when he put his foot on the gas, there was nothing Yard could do. That fight went from being possibly Yard ahead after 8 rounds to Tunde throwing in the towel and everyone wondering how the hell's that happened in almost an instant. You know, you blink and you missed it. But we'll move on to Dimitri Bivol. Look, more through Eddie Hearn, as we mentioned earlier, with Madrimov than Bivol himself, was there the cries of outrage after that first fight. And I do actually agree with Eddie Hearn here. Look, I had it 116, 112 to Bivol on the night, 115, 113 after a couple of watchbacks the following day. Can't see a way that you got 116, 112 Peterbiev, not at all, which is what one of the judges had. Look, he's had a stellar career, and this is the thing with Bivol. When he Canelo jumped up to face him, everyone thought he was just going to be similar to the Kovalev fight. Canelo would just find a way and break him down. But that was, for me, one of the greatest boxing performances of the last 10, 15 years that we got from Dimitri Bivol that night against Canelo. And he does have he does have a good boxing ability, and he's not known as the biggest puncher, but he can punch. And if Beterbiev wants to come forward and make a statement on Saturday night, Dimitri Bivol's counter punching and his overhand right will be there for him all night long. Dimitri Bivol just needs to be brave for me. Yes, take some licks, stay in the pocket more than he did in the first fight, but I can see a path to victory for him, and in a way that not a lot of people are probably expecting as well. So left people waiting long enough, mate. The main event Saturday night, all the marbles at £175. Who will win this rematch between Artem Beterbiev and Dimitri Bivol?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Bivol's punching power there, and the knockout of Trent Broadhurst, the Aussie, I think in Monaco as well, springs to mind.
Yeah, the same card as Caballero and Chisora, mate. Yes.
Yeah, ironically enough. But I think Bivol is a formidable fighter, and we're both on the exact same page by the sound of it, that we thought Bivol won the fight, but he didn't get it. So he's going to have to do something different. He's going to have to go into the eye of the storm, Fury Wilder style, Crawler Barroso style. He's going to have to go for it a little bit more. I think he's going to have to play a risky game, but I think he's going to come out on top, and I think it's going to be a Bivol win here.
Yeah, by what you said, stoppage or points?
Of course. I'm going to say Wiz by points.
Bivol by points. So there we go, guys. 7 monumentally amazing fights on Saturday night are coming your way from Saudi Arabia. Or I say Saturday night, I mean Callum Smith and Joshua Buatsi are going to be in the ring at 4:45 if the schedule that's going around is to be believed. So get you in your seats early on Saturday afternoon. Look, all that's left for me to say is a big thank you to my guest, James. James, let the people know what your social media handles are and where they can find you if they're not already.
Yeah, at James Sweetnam 99 on Twitter, at j.sweetnam99 on Instagram. Yeah, please give me a follow. Please engage with the content. It's always appreciated. I've got a YouTube channel as well that people can probably track down. But yeah, thank you very much for having me, Liam. It's been a pleasure. And hopefully I've not looked too ridiculous with some of these picks. Hopefully some of them come in.
Yeah, no, look, it's been great having you on, mate. It's been great to get the show back up and running. Before we sign off, a big thank you to Jay's Fight Talk for allowing me to move Liam's Fight Night picks over onto the platform. I'm looking forward to getting back up and running with the show. Big thank you to everyone watching. Please interact in the comments. Let us know if you agree with our predictions. Let us know if you think we're being a bit too outrageous. I mean, I can imagine which one of mine may get some of those comments back in return, but I'm here for it. And as I say every week, like, comment, and subscribe to JFT. Like, comment, and subscribe to James on all his platforms. Please follow myself at Liam_Tully9. We will be back at the same time next week with a new guest. Looking forward to another great week of fights, both in the UK and in America. Thank you very much, and see you soon.